I pay my respects to the elders past and present of the Bunurong, and I extend that respect to you, Caroline. I was on Wurundjeri country as part of my duties with the Commission, meeting with mob up there in 2023, and it was great to be doing that. As Andrew has said, I grew up in social housing. I did that in the late 50s and the 60s. My parents were low-paid working people. We had a large family. There were 8 of us, so we were a classic working poor family who only were housed by reason of the government public housing program, which was underway in the post-war period. I am indebted to the human rights-based policies of that era for everything that I have become ever since, because you can't live, let alone thrive, without housing, and we wouldn't have it but for the enlightened policies that were implemented in that age. As Andrew's introduction would show, I have had a history of action and writing and judicial work and all manner of things in relation to housing, and that reflects my long-standing commitment to it. I should also say that I'm delighted to be here with you today, because I've worked with just such a group as yours in Victoria, the Public Housing Tenants Association, and I've also worked on the ground in a community development capacity in a public housing community whose aspirations and modes of action are very similar to yours. So it's wonderful to be speaking with you. The reason why I wrote the book was that it became increasingly clear that we had seriously lost our way as a country in relation to housing the population. And that losing of the way was a couple of generations in the making, and I think it'll be a couple of generations in the unmaking. The story of how this disaster happened is told in the book. The consequences of it are obvious to everybody, and the point that I would make to you in particular is that an expansion of government commitment to public housing is absolutely fundamental as part of the solution to this multifaceted disaster. It is multifaceted because by contrast with the situation which my parents had in the 50s and 60s, it's not possible for a low-paid family, a working poor family, to buy a house anywhere in Australia that is affordable at the present time. The situation is worse in the big metropolises, Sydney and Melbourne, but it's not really very much better elsewhere, other than marginal housing in regional towns. It's really quite impossible for a person on ordinary wages or even a dual income family on ordinary wages to buy a home. That means, of course, that they have to find housing somewhere, and usually that's within the private rental market. And in my day, government made it possible for people to access housing even though they were paid, but that's just not the same situation applying anymore. The private rental market is in just about the same state. There are very few houses, none in some local government areas, which are affordable to ordinary working people. By affordable, I mean at a rate of rent which would involve them paying no more than 30% of the household income. I don't know of any tenants at the moment who are paying anything like 30% of household income. Most would be paying 50%, and there are some, even members of my own family, who are paying more. So the situation is that it's so hard to be in to obtain housing, be it for ownership or rented, that enormous pressure is put on the public housing system. And as you would know better than anybody, it's very difficult to obtain public housing. You certainly have to be on income support of some kind and be in a special category that enables you to access public housing, be that social housing or public housing. Public housing being directly provided by the government, social housing being provided by some intermediary such as a community housing association. Now, because it's so hard to access public housing, those who can't access housing to own or to rent are in a position of great vulnerability and precarity. And that group is the group who fall into homelessness, sometime for an extended period. I'm using homelessness in this broad sense of not having secure housing, couch surfing, living in cars, right through to rough sleeping, which is the worst form of it at all. So what I've just described is not something that you need to be told about, because you're all very experienced in this field, but it's worth laying the groundwork, I think, for the question of how we understand this problem, how we talk about it, how we explain it, and what we should do about it. My contention is that the way that the problem has occurred is that housing has become has been changed as a system from something that was directed at meeting the needs of people in the immediate post-war period through gradually something whose purpose is to provide a means of income generation and profit generation and investment for people who have the money to engage in that kind of investment. So there's been a shift from people to profit as being the overall purpose of the system. That has been associated with another shift, a shift away from treating residential tenancy of any kind as being a legitimate form of tenure, as being something in which people can live with dignity and respect, to something that is simply a material object owned by somebody else, rented to another person in order to extract profit or tax-generated advantage to them. So there's so that the value of rental housing, public or private, has become devalued, almost stigmatized in the public realm. And along with that, the people who occupy rental housing have become devalued and stigmatized and regarded as non-owners, the ultimate other, those who don't or can't own, and therefore aren't deserving for reasons for which they are to be blamed. I'm contending that a wholly different approach should be adopted to the problem, and that's an approach based on the human right to housing. The purpose of housing ought to be to meet the needs of all human persons for housing. It should be the government's international law responsibility, which it has accepted because we are a party to the relevant international treaties, to ensure that everybody has access to housing, should be made law here and implemented as law here. That's to say, domestically. The way to do that is not just one way or two ways or even 10 ways. It's in many different ways because the system is so complex. Housing needs to be made affordable for those who have the capacity and wish to own. Housing needs to be made affordable for those who can only or wish to rent. And that kind of housing, just like owned housing, needs to be secure, needs to be a way that people can live in peace, in dignity, and in security. At the moment, that can't happen, though I note that things are changing in New South Wales in this regard, and I think that's a very good thing. Another way, and this way is very important to you, having regard to your objects, is to upscale the investment in all kinds of social housing to a much greater degree than we presently have. About 6%, or it might be as low as 3%, depending on how it's counted, of total housing is social housing. It needs to be 10 plus to be anywhere near comparable with like countries, and that involves a massive investment in social housing, which is beginning to happen, but which is not happening on anything like the scale that it needs to. And then lastly, the right to housing is prima facie violated in all cases of homelessness, because homelessness is acknowledged to be a consequence of structural failure in the housing system. And therefore, all persons who are homeless are there because of structural failures in the housing system, which has resulted in their particular needs not being met, and they should be. And therefore, it's a human rights violation that is the ultimate cause of homelessness. The things are changing a bit for the better in the current environment. Regrettably, no government has yet accepted the human rights way of understanding the problem, and therefore hasn't acted in the comprehensive way that the human rights understanding would require if the state's human rights obligations are to be met. But clearly, in Victoria and also in New South Wales and in some other places, there has been an increase in action across all the four parts of the system: ownership, rental housing, social housing, and homelessness. And time doesn't really permit, I think, a catalogue of all these things. But I do acknowledge that it's happened. I want to include in this description of the problem acknowledgement of just how bad the situation is for the First Peoples. First Peoples are less likely to be owners, more likely to be renters, and more likely to be homeless to the extent of 5 to 10 times more than the general population. That is an injustice caused by colonisation that is continuing and is a consequence of the way that the land was stolen in the establishment of what is now called the Commonwealth of Australia. Through their resilience and action in all sorts of ways, First Peoples organisations are pressing governments to implement the concept of self-determination in relation to housing, and I applaud that as something that must form the basis of addressing the problem with respect to them. I want to end with what I say should happen in order to address this problem. I think that a number of things should happen. Firstly, there needs to be a national housing and homelessness plan based on human rights, both in content and in approach. The kind of plan that could be adopted is the kind of plan that Kylea Tink and David Pocock are promoting. There is legislation in the Senate that was the subject of a Senate inquiry hearing last week in which I appeared, which would cause that kind of plan to be formulated and implemented. I support that kind of approach. It's a parlous state of affairs and represents a country not caring and not understanding the nature of its of state obligations to provide housing when there is no national housing and homelessness plan to direct the national effort towards that fundamental social purpose. But that's the situation in Australia at the moment, and that needs to change. The second thing that needs to happen is that residential tenancies legislation needs to be reformed to implement certain elementary human rights principles. One of those is security of tenure. Another is controlling rents, or regulating them might be a better way to put it, because controlling rents probably wouldn't work, but regulating rents. And a third aspect is to ensure that housing is of habitable standard and appropriate quality. Now, all these points apply equally to private rental housing and social housing. All these principles are tenure neutral in that regard, and there should be reform of laws applying to residential tenancy generally in that direction. And the last thing that should happen is there needs to be a radical upscaling of investment in social housing, but in a way which includes those living in social housing in the approach. In other words, the approach must be based upon including them in decision making, in design, and in implementation. I've already made the point that in relation to First Peoples housing, that the principle of self-determination should be the underpinning of action in relation to that. That's a bit of a sprint through a complex area. I hope it does justice to the subject. I suspect it hasn't. But Andrew, over to you now. Or I think it's you. Is it you? I've got you down as Karen. Is it? Is that the chair?
Well, you got one. Yeah. So yeah. So do we have time to open up to the floor? Yeah, perfect. Right, I've got a few questions, but does anyone want to jump in?
By the way, this is Siobhan, Kevin.
Thanks, Siobhan. Yeah.
Ooh.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Can I come in?
Yeah,
Thank you very much for that, Kevin. I've got I'm on Gadigal land, by the way, and which they call St. Peter's. Anyway, I've got a sort of historical problem, which is why is there this upsurge in landlordism over the last couple of decades?
Yeah.
Given that the superannuation schemes were so much increased in the early 90s, so that people looking for security in their old age, etc., or even to pass on inheritances to their children, one would have thought that it would be better for them to put their money into superannuation than into housing.
Yeah. Well, that is a really good question. Landlordism is really a phenomena of the changes to the taxation regime that were made by Howard in 1999. Before 1999, the history of housing can be summarised in this way. Immediately post-war, Curtin asked Chifley to establish a Commonwealth Housing Commission, which was done. That commission recommended that there be a very substantial government effort to create housing as part of post-war reconstruction. It was based on human rights expressly mentioned in the founding document. It was tenure neutral, so that there was investment in rental housing, which is how my parents began. and in owned housing, so that both were seen in balance as being part of the solution. Public housing and private housing sitting together within a housing system through which the population was housed. In 1949, Menzies obtained power, and he changed that policy in the direction of ownership. He called the policy as being one directed at creating a society of little capitalists, and used those words to describe it. It's important to understand that he was talking about individual ownership, not about landlordism. He was talking about the idea of having a home as a mark of middle class attainment, not about investing in homes or in many homes as a business. That came later. Over the decades, the focus on home ownership became all the greater. Public investment in social housing became all the lesser, and the rot had really set in towards the end of the 20th century. What made the situation really dire was that Howard in the late 90s introduced a capital gains tax discount of 50% on all investment, but including investment in residential housing. And he extended the negative gearing concession to housing, investment in housing. Now, income lost that should be obtained by government, but is not because of a concession, is called a taxation expenditure. And it represents the amount that the government is not receiving because it's decided that certain categories of investment will be treated differently. The amount yearly today that the government loses by way of taxation expenditure because of the concessions in relation to negative gearing and the capital gains discount is in the order of $150 billion per year, which is an astonishing amount of money. Now, to come back to your question, Peter, what's happened is that the taxation system has encouraged successfully landlordism, that's to say multiple ownership of multiple houses as a business, to the extent that it's become institutionalized in the system. And it's costing the government $150 billion a year, half of which, if it was taken back, could result in a massive upscaling of the social housing effort over time in a way which would absolutely transform the face of Australia's housing system. So landlordism is a deep problem with serious contemporary consequences, but has an historical trajectory which is not well understood and which I've sought here to explain.
Thank you.
Before I jump in, does anyone have any questions? Moira?
Yeah, look, an interesting one is, and I mean, this is, I'm talking about New South Wales now, but there's similar issues in other states, is once you own a number, beyond a number of properties over a certain amount as investment property, in other words, it's not your place of residence, you pay land tax.
Yeah.
But yes, but it appears from my little bit of research now and so on, that in fact, people can set up all sorts of trusts and arrangements to actually avoid land tax. The idea was that land tax would generate income. It was one of the ideas about income coming back to the state to support more housing. But there's heaps of ways that people can just escape that.
Land tax is a big issue in Victoria because the government has increased it and also made it applicable to all second houses. This has resulted in the sale of many second houses by people who can't afford to pay the tax, and has increased the supply of housing to a certain extent, which is very welcome. I'm not aware of the avoidance arrangements of which you've spoken, Marie, but I'm in principle oppose arrangements through which people can avoid their lawful obligations to pay a tax through which the government can increase housing in a situation where that's desperately needed.
I won't go into the details about the various ways, but there are all sorts of arrangements that can be made.
Okay.
Yeah. Trusts and off-seas and, you know, blah, blah. Yeah. Those in the know who know how to work the system to their advantage.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other people? No? Going once?
I think Rach put her name on the list there in the comments.
You go first, Siobhan. That's okay. You go.
Oh, no, you can go.
Okay. All right. Kevin, that was a really good presentation. Thanks very much. I was wondering if you've got any insight on the international situation. I was reading that the 2/3 of the world's wealth now is based around property ownership. So home ownership, second homes, property investments, and so on. Would you be able to comment on that? And also just give us a little bit more about this human rights bill push, human rights, homelessness push.
Yeah,
led by the Deals. Thanks.
Sure. Yeah, it's there is an international housing crisis, which has been caused by neoliberalism, essentially. Neoliberalism being that suite of ideas which took control in modern democracies in the last 25 years of the 20th century, amounting to small government, expanding the private sector, increasing individual reliance, and treating and low taxation regimes, the dismantling of supports and for unions and workers, and many other things. And we've seen that roll through here. We've seen that roll through other countries. The best source for understanding this is the website of the Special Rapporteur on the right to adequate housing at the United Nations. The current Special Rapporteur is an Indian American. By that I mean a subcontinental Indian, not a native Indian American. And it's a fantastic resource. Just search Special Rapporteur United Nations and you'll find it all there. Leilani Farr was the second rapporteur and has been particularly interested in this. And I've listened to a number of podcasts that she has addressed in which she covers this very subject, Rachel, and can speak about it with much greater authority than I. And so I would recommend that you have a look at that. Now, in relation to the housing bill, the bill is the National Housing and Homelessness Plan Bill 2024. It was presented in the House of Representatives by Kalia Tink, who, of course, is an independent MP from an electorate in Sydney, and by Senator David Pocock. It's now in the Senate. The bill is able to be accessed on the internet just by typing in those words, National Housing and Homelessness Bill 2024. It's expressed in plain English, and you do not need a law degree to understand it. The bill would obligate the Commonwealth Government to formulate and implement a plan for addressing housing issues across all the sectors of the system which I've described. Make home ownership more affordable, have a better have better and fairer rental housing laws, increase the public sector aspect of the system, and address homelessness for those experiencing that. It also would establish a housing advocate as a kind of accountability mechanism, and there is another institution created which is not present in my mind at the moment, but it's part of a way of ensuring that the government is doing its job and actually implementing the plan. The plan is based on express recognition of the human right to housing, and that would represent the strongest recognition of that right in Australian law than has ever happened. The approach in the Act or in the bill is based on the human rights-based approach. These are matters which I, as Andrew would know, I cover in the book, and these are important. These are important things from the point of view of your group, because the human rights-based approach insists that people affected, in other words, civil society, especially those living the experience of the thing needing to be done, are included in the formulation of the plan and the implementation of it. The legislation also acknowledges the right to self-determination of the First Peoples and includes that as a governing principle. I think further work can be done to actually implement that principle in the plan, but that's a matter of detail. Not for today. The plan is the result of good work done by two Sydney academics, Chris Martin and Hal Pawson, in company with 100 plus others, including myself. Hal and Chris advised those two MPs on the plan. The government has not said that it will adopt it, and it's, on the other hand, it's been referred to the Senate estimates, to the Senate Legislation Committee for examination. That examination is happening now, and the report is due on Friday, the 15th of November. I'm not confident that the government will accept the bill, and I'm disappointed in anticipation in that regard. But I'm hopeful that they will at least recognise the importance of the human right to housing as a part of the overall solution. I think we all need to be in the game for the long term here. I'm completely convinced that until we accept the human right to housing as the fundamental purpose of the housing system, that we won't get to where we need to go. It'll take a fair while for that to happen, but it has to happen, and therefore it will happen.
Yeah.
Siobhan.
Awesome. My question is a bit more of a political economy question. Maybe 6 years ago, I was at I think an Australian Institute talk, and a pretty well-known Labor figure, really well-known Labor figure, was talking about how in the political calculus, 60% of the population own a home and therefore have a explicit interest in the housing system being the way that it is, right? The infamous, I think infamous quote from John Howard that nobody complained when the house prices went up. Do you think the political landscape there has shifted in that 60%, the thinking, and will it change over time?
Good question. The people are now complaining, not that their own house prices are going up, but that house prices are going up because their children can't afford to get into homes. People are complaining that house prices are going up, not their own, but generally, because young people are deferring the commencement of families, and the birth rate is at below replacement rates. People are complaining about house prices going up because they have an understanding that it's damaging community solidarity to the point where it's a concern. The extent to which this is contributing to inequality, to social exclusion, and to different life's outcomes is, I think, becoming increasingly understood. So I think things are changing. I think the consciousness of the problem and what needs to be done is not really informed by human rights ideas, the dignity of the human person, the obligations of government, of a human rights nature, and so on, but are really based on more general principles, social justice, social inclusion, to an extent, citizenship theory, that we're all citizens and should have a right to look to the government for the most basic things, particularly housing, and that's not happening. So there is, I think, Siobhan, a shift. It's a shift that the current government doesn't think has moved far enough to enable it to change the negative gearing and capital gains tax laws. They seem to have no interest in doing that. With the election of Donald Trump in the United States last week, it's even less likely that that'll happen. They'll be very cautious, I think, with anything radical like that. That's a pity, because it's costing the state an enormous amount of money, which it sorely needs in order to address the problem. So my answer to your question is yes. The realpolitik of the situation is difficult. The realpolitik of the situation was demonstrated by the result in the 2019 election. Bill Shorten took a radical agenda to the people and got badly beaten. That agenda included action on negative gearing and capital gains tax concessions. And that's, I think, shocked the Labor government and the Labor Party to its core, and made it much more focused upon what you might call practical remedies rather than system remedies. And system remedies are those that are really needed. We need a values debate in this country. What we saw in America was a values debate. The wrong values won, but it was a values debate. We need a values debate in this country, I think, and we need to ensure that the right values win.
Yeah. Good stuff. Right. Rach, you had a question?
Oh yeah, just that was great, Kevin. A final question. We do have an action planned, a National Day of Action planned for February the 4th next year. Actually, Public Housing is going to Canberra along with some other groups.
Yep.
there's going to be actions also taking part across the country in some form. And we really want to keep the grassroots mobilising happening, because demolition of 44 public housing towers is planned for Melbourne and significant swathes of the estates here. So I'm just wondering if this would be something that you could put your name to, or possibly speak at, to assist the grassroots in our next stages. That's it.
Yeah, I could. I'd need to see what the program is, but I would think that it's something that I could support and speak at in some way. Absolutely. I'm not sure where I'll be on the 4th of February, but if I'm here and available, then I'll support it. Love to.
Right.
Thank you very much, Kevin.
Okay, well, it's been great to be with you. Thank you for hearing me for such an extended period, and I congratulate your group on your work. I think it's absolutely marvellous, and all strength to your effort. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Bye
very
for now.
much.
Bye.
Thanks, Kevin.